Hi, welcome to Technology and Sustainability, a match made in heaven. I am Sarah Repucci. I'm the global lead for research programs for Economist Impact. We're here now to talk about how technology can support sustainability. Tech solutions can drive positive change in business and make leaders feel empowered in their sustainability journey. Technology can also help the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals by scaling results and attracting investment where it's most needed. And it can drive progress to overcome the challenges that climate change is posing to business itself. These are some of the topics that we'll be exploring today. I'm joined right now by 5 amazing panelists. Tom DeLay is Chief Executive of Carbon Trust. Ashley Nunes is Director for Federal Policy, Climate, and Energy for the Breakthrough Institute. Nick Passey is Head of Commercial Digital and IT International in Japan for AstraZeneca. And Satish Thomas is Corporate Vice President for Microsoft. And Andrea Vena is Chief Climate Sustainability Officer for the European Space Agency. Thank you all for being here. Let's get started. Ashley, I'll start with you. You've focused on the economics of clean technology adoption. Could you elaborate a bit on how technology can drive sustainability and reduce carbon intensity, especially in sectors like transportation and energy?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Certainly it's the case that if we look at the evolution of technology, particularly over the past decade or so, we have seen remarkable technologies that are designed to considerably reduce carbon emissions. So the cost index, for example, that we see aboard jet airplanes today is a great example of this. It's a piece of technology that effectively weighs the value of time against the value of fuel. And a cost index of 0 usually means that you burn very little fuel. It takes you a little bit longer to get there, but the carbon intensity associated with the trip is much, much lower. At the same time, we've seen technologies introduced in the land transportation sector, for example, where improvements in the internal combustion engine result in improvements in fuel economy. And when you improve fuel economy, what you see is a dramatic reduction in the magnitude of carbon emissions for every mile traveled in a vehicle.
Great, thank you. Andrea, I'll move to you. Businesses are striving for net zero, and you've been supporting them in this journey. Tell us how you're working with global businesses to help them use space to achieve their net zero goals.
Yeah, net zero is really a target for many companies. So we have big companies that are working for the European Space Agency that are part of our supply chain, but we have also plenty of companies that are of small or medium size, and we have new companies. So we have the entire new space sector that is working is entering the space sector and therefore is working very closely with the agency. We are playing a leading role for those companies in the space sector. We are applying eco-design concept in our system since a number of years, and we are transferring this knowledge to those companies. Of course, they are not working exclusively with us, but they are learning a lot from the European Space Agency and the way we are applying those eco-conception and eco-design approaches to our systems. So I would say, all in all, they are really looking for guidance. We provide this guidance, and we are to their side in their journey to net zero.
And Tom, technology solutions have been very fast evolving, and they have many applications for climate solutions. Tell us how things like big data feeds into these issues, or secure algorithms, how they enhance decision-making in the context of sustainability and achieving net zero.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we've worked with organizations, small and large, including financial institutions, on that transition to net zero. And sustainability challenges are getting more difficult. Unfortunately, technology solutions are coming in to help address some of those challenges. For a long time, net zero was, let me understand my own direct impact on the environment, scopes 1 and 2. Now we understand that it's crucial for organizations to understand the full value chain impact that they have, therefore including scope 3. It becomes a lot more complex. And as it becomes more complex, we also know that there is an assurance requirement on the result that you might obtain that then has to get put into your company accounts and disclosure. So you've got decision making by the organization that is better if they have a really good handle on what scopes 1, 2, and 3 really mean. They can understand the opportunities and the risks better. They can make better decisions. But they also have to then report those decisions and those figures back through multiple carbon accounting tables, and indeed, in most cases, in companies' main accounts. So the technology solution that has taken us from where we used to work in the past with specific, very small data sets, Excel, bespoke algorithms, are now being replaced by much more sophisticated approaches where big data is pulled in from a number of data sets, where dedicated software platforms use consistent algorithms to allow that data to be processed. And you actually end up with a greater reliance on what we call primary data, which is actual data from a value chain, as opposed to secondary data that has always been used as being an average for a particular sector or situation. So a combination of the data sets being better, more primary data, a better algorithm, often with machine learning implied within its processing, means that you end up with results that have a narrow error band, and certainly a narrower error band than would have been the case in the past, and are quicker and more resilient and more repeatable. So in essence, you're taking something that's getting more complex and using technology solutions not just to improve it, but to actually make it something that you can rely on.
Satish, let's bring you in here. You lead strategy for Microsoft's cloud technology. Tell us the role of that technology in Microsoft's sustainability ambitions.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and for the opportunity to be part of this discussion as well. So, I'll start at the top, which is at Microsoft, we're striving as a company to become carbon negative, water positive, and zero waste by 2030. And beyond that, provide the technology that's needed to help build a more sustainable world that'll support a net zero economy. And when you look at how technology can help our customers with their sustainable journey, there are 3 main things that I'll highlight here. First, everything starts and ends with well-organized data. To be able to scale and have a 360 view of an organization's ESG footprint. Second is taking that data and being able to analyze it, report it, and improve transparency and efficiencies, and help us accelerate all of our sustainability goals. The third thing that we're doing here is, and again, this goes beyond technology, it's using our platform as a company with global partners, researchers, scientists, governments to influence the development of comprehensive yet flexible climate disclosures. And finally, we're taking all of these learnings at Microsoft and productizing it. So last year, we introduced the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability. So this is a solution that's built on the Microsoft Cloud, which includes planet-scale infrastructure, be it Azure, business applications, be it Dynamics 365, low-code, no-code, and Power Platform, Azure, Data Fabric, AI security, and more. And it includes all of our learnings that we have from our own ESG journey, and brings together a robust, integrated set of capabilities to help organizations around the world accelerate their sustainable progress and business growth.
And Nick, you've been involved in building partnerships across the world to address healthcare challenges through tech and innovation. Tell us about the role of innovation in scaling technology-enabled patient care solutions in emerging markets.
Yep, so I think that overall AstraZeneca is committed to transforming healthcare by harnessing the power of science and innovation to benefit people, society, and the planet. I think climate change certainly is a critical health crisis for us. And it may be a surprise to you to hear that healthcare contributes between 5 and 8% of the carbon emissions globally. And so when we're looking at this, I think it's just been highlighted before, we look both at our internal footprint of our own operations, that of our value chain, then also look at how we can contribute with the broader ecosystem to reduce healthcare systems emissions. And I think a key part of this is really about the early identification of diseases and help people to be able to impact on that earlier, because the further a disease progresses, then the more carbon there is associated. So, for example, in the world, there are over 800 million people living with CKD. And if you get to the stage of having dialysis, then this is a very carbon intensive activity. So I think what we look to do is to work with partners and with innovation solutions across like government, with academia, with startups, to deliver new solutions and transform healthcare processes. And as part of that, help healthcare to become more efficient, but also to reduce the emissions and to bring the best ideas from around the world through our innovation hubs, which we call A-Catalysts. So that's one of our approaches we take.
So I'd love to dig in a bit on some of these examples. Tom, I'll turn back to you. Could you elaborate for us on the concept of using product carbon footprinting across a value chain as an example of how technology can improve sustainability efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. So product carbon footprinting essentially is the measurement on a life cycle basis of the environmental impact of a product or indeed a service. And understanding that really gives you a good insight into your overall impact, scopes 1, 2, and 3, and actually can go well beyond product carbon footprinting. You can do footprinting in the same way, looking at water, other critical minerals and sources, and so on. Once you've got that better understanding, you can decide how then to change over time as you move towards net zero, whatever it is you're doing. Most organizations start with the status quo, and then they start optimizing the status quo. And eventually, as things improve and they start seeing their pathway to net zero, they realize something more fundamental has got to change. So typically, that's a time where you can go back to your product carbon footprint or your service carbon footprint and say, what can I do materially to change this? Andrea mentioned eco-design. Absolutely, you can design something to meet the same functional requirements as what you've had, but in a far more responsible and less resource inefficient way than you've had in the past. All of this requires a lot of data to ensure that what you're doing is really going to have the impact on your pathway to net zero. So at the optimizing stage, I would argue that you can use digital twins in many cases to really optimize process emissions. Process emissions are massive, generally misunderstood. Digital twins is a great way of understanding how process emissions really happen in a whole wide range of industries. Once you go from the optimization, then you go into transformation. You've got to do something more radical. That's, I think, where product carbon footprinting really helps you to say, okay, there's something we're doing here that's intrinsically less resource efficient than it could be. We'll change the design. We'll include a parameter that says it's got to reduce carbon emissions, or it's got to reduce water stress. And you continue on your journey. But right the way through this process, you are reliant increasingly on data sets being available, being widely owned and shared, so that you can get best practice, use it through an efficient platform, and actually get to a point where the decisions that you make are the best ones for your organization on a route to net zero.
Andrea, Tom mentioned digital twins. Digital twins, AI, machine learning, we've all heard about. They're all applied to data from space. So maybe you could give us some specific examples of how these technologies are being employed to mitigate climate change and also to preserve biodiversity.
Sure. Digital twins and artificial intelligence, machine learning are components of a big undertaking that is in the making at European level and is promoted by the European Space Agency, which is called the Space for a Green Future Accelerator. It is not a space program as such, so we are not building additional capacity, but we are exactly using the existing capacity in space and the existing capacity on other areas to make data fusion. So to use the resources that are already available to integrate the data set and then provide answers to public and private sectors. And the key word in this initiative is that we are working together, public and private, to develop new initiatives and provide also tools for companies that want to use them. This is a great initiative promoted by ESA. We are going to work with the European Commission with that on DG Clima, that is going to sign an agreement with us very soon in Spain in November. So this is a very important part of the picture for the use of the huge amount of data that is coming from space, that are already very valuable for the analysis of climate variables or for the use for different services and applications, but are, for the largest part, yet untapped. So not really used as they could. And this is an initiative that, without adding additional infrastructure, is promoting the use of space data and the data set through what we are saying, machine learning and artificial intelligence.
Really interesting. Satish, why don't you tell us a bit more about AI, which we're all talking about quite a bit right now? What is the role of AI in sustainability, and how do you think that it can accelerate companies' efforts in this area?
Yes, Sarah, I'm glad you asked about AI. So, the few things, what we're seeing across the board is kind of industry-specific AI solutions go to market at scale to enable more efficiency in how companies operate and deliver value to customers. And at least in my time in the industry or ever, the level of uptake and momentum of uptake we have never seen across every industry and many industries, be it financial services, retail, healthcare, energy, public sector, and more. And I'll pick on two specific examples. One is manufacturing, which is where we see our customers using AI to lower CO2 emissions when producing key materials like creating industrial cement. So AI is being used to autonomously optimize machine parameters and detect anomalies in production process, saving thousands of tons of CO2 by minimizing energy consumption volatility in the cement kiln and reducing overall runtime while achieving the same output. And this is happening today, right? The second example I'll pick is, again, retail and consumer goods space, where we're seeing organizations using AI across customer and supplier data to minimize fresh grocery waste by improving demand forecasting and inventory level management. And again, that is happening today. So again, the keynote here is, we're infusing AI into all of our solutions, and in the context of sustainability, I'll call out, we with the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability, we're also adding capabilities around AI and LLM. We're introducing this capability called what if analysis. And just to walk you through a little bit of that, the what if analysis work in the Microsoft Cloud for Sustainability will give our customers the ability to make more efficient choices in how they operate their business. For example, the ability to select a supplier with the lowest emissions impact and so on. So this capability will use an AI model underneath to forecast the emissions impact over time of changing various consumption variables. So again, lots of interest, and we're working very closely with customers across industries on that. So ultimately, all of this, will help sustainability managers, procurement officers, facility managers, and other users to fine-tune decisions in the furtherance of reducing, to drive reductions in their organization's footprint, energy footprint. So again, a lot of exciting work here, and AI is infusing a lot more energy and expanding the realm of what's possible here, to be honest.
And Nick, how about in healthcare? What trends from where you sit are you seeing in AI and sustainability, and how are you seeing them help patients?
Yes, I think there are tremendous opportunities in solutions which we call like beyond the pill or beyond the kind of treatment phase that can also benefit both the climate but also patient experiences and outcomes. And like one of the areas that we're currently working on is how to transition basically from paper product information leaflets to electronic product information by default for all of our medicines by 2030. So I think like by doing this, and it's as simple as basically having a QR code on the side of the packaging, and then to be able to take people to product information, whether that's within our own company portals or health authority portals. And by doing that, we can not only provide information in a more convenient form, but also, if in line with regulations, provide information about disease or product information to help people use the product more easily and so on. So this is a trend that we now start to see across quite a number of countries across the world. So, for example, in Japan, in Singapore, in Canada, we have actually 16 countries progressing on pilots right now. I think just globally, the potential just for our company in a single year is saving 500,000 trees, 50,000 carbon equivalent kilos, and 16 billion litres of water. And to give you an idea, just in one country, in Japan, which is one of the most progressed, we're already removing 30 million sheets of paper in 1 year just through adopting this. So I think we can both reduce our carbon footprint through our operations, but then also provide better experiences and outcomes for patients with their diseases as well, and at huge scale.
Let's talk a bit about some of the challenges and some of the solutions to those. Ashley, in your work, you've emphasized the importance of enumerating the costs associated with sustainability efforts. How can policymakers and businesses effectively balance the climate benefits with the financial and environmental costs of adopting new technologies?
Well, I think it's important to understand first and foremost that historically, when we have seen investments in technology, the usual mantra is that as we are able to achieve scale for many of these technologies, the costs will drop. And there's certainly some evidence to suggest that's true. So if you look at the original, mobile phones that came out indexed to today's dollars, it would, the first generation of mobile phones would cost you something in the order of about $10,000 today. And that's certainly not what mobile phones cost today. But that being said, what is true of one particular piece of technology isn't necessarily true of technology as a whole. So if we look, for example, at electric cars, this is a decarbonization pathway that has been embraced by many policymakers. The current Biden administration certainly has gone all in on electric cars. Historically, the notion behind the adoption of electric cars is that we see reductions in emissions over a period of time. And the more and more electric cars we manufacture, the cheaper it's going to be for consumers because, once again, we see economies of scale. However, if you look at the inflation-adjusted price of electric cars, the inflation-adjusted price has gone up over time, despite the fact that the most expensive component of the vehicle, which is the battery, has actually gone down in terms of its relative cost. So I think, when we think about what the cost of addressing climate change actually is, it's important to also remember what the toll is, the financial cost is on consumers. And it's ultimately consumers that bear the brunt of the sticker price, which is why we think we are beginning to see slowdowns in the uptake of technologies like electric cars amongst middle and low income households. So I think that's certainly something that policymakers need to be aware of.
And that definitely relates to the area of health as well. Nick, digital inclusion is a challenge, especially in low and middle income countries. So tell us about how technology can help address healthcare affordability and equity.
Yep, so I think maybe we have an example that we're doing in emerging markets related to lung cancer identification. So I'm sure you're aware that there are many chest x-rays that are performed and there are opportunities through the interpretation of these to be able to identify diseases, but that requires high skills and experience. And especially in emerging markets, there's a lack of fully trained physicians to be able to read images and to be able to interpret them. But in addition to skill-related challenges, also there's an overuse in terms of x-rays, which is contributing to carbon footprint. And actually, pathology testing and diagnostic imaging contribute 9% of healthcare's carbon footprint and is also a high cost. So we have a collaboration as part of our A-Catalyst network with a company called Cure AI that have an AI solution, which is basically focused on the interpretation of radiology images, which is basically a cost-effective way of identifying lung cancer patients early in emerging markets by detecting incidental lung nodules. And so far, operating with our partners, now we're approaching 1 million scans that have been performed through this. But also by doing it on this, we're helping to identify patients earlier to have better outcomes with their diseases and to have earlier interventions and to help them with their disease progression, but also it's contributing from a carbon standpoint to make the pathology lower carbon impact overall as a process. So that's one example, and we've made a commitment as part of the World Economic Forum Edison Alliance to do 5 million screens through this approach by 2025. So again, we're looking to embed these solutions in healthcare systems and to transform at scale across especially the lower middle income countries.
And Andrea, pushing on this topic of environmental impact of technology, could you share some of the best practices or initiatives that ESA is undertaking to ensure that technology development aligns with sustainability principles?
Yeah, very much. Technology is at the core of space activities. We are doing innovation every single space mission that we are designing and inventing. So it's very important that we associate to this kind of innovation also sustainability criteria. Space has been contributing for decades to the sustainable goals, sustainable development goals, and we intend to keep doing so. But for doing so, we need to introduce a few changes in the way in which space systems are designed and developed and produced, especially considering that we are going towards a sort of a mass production for space systems. So not in the public area, but in the private area. New space means big constellations with many launches, with many satellites in orbit. So beside life cycle thinking and the eco-design that we were mentioning already before, I would say that a couple of concepts that are linked to the recycling of spacecraft and reusing of launchers are fundamental if you want to guarantee that sustainable space is providing this big contribution to the sustainable development of society. It is imperative that public entities, as European Space Agency, but also other public space agencies, take the initiative to guide our companies towards this concept: life cycle thinking, eco-design, but also recycling and reuse of different parts. There will be a cost for sure, and that's the reason why the public entities are there for supporting them and providing them with competitive advantage, because these things are at the end those that are going to reward in terms of presence on the market.
Satish, let's talk a little bit about regulation. There's quite a lot of new sustainability regulations, ESG priorities. What are you hearing from some of the businesses that you work with about how to manage these regulations?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I think there's three things that we're seeing in market just more broadly, right? The first one is around business impact, right? Which is the main trend we're seeing in sustainability efforts is being able to turn that into real business opportunities for companies. And I think McKinsey put out a report recently that said up to $5 trillion will be invested annually in sustainability. So as you can see, directionally very high number. And today we're seeing a lot of investment in sectors striving to gain ground on decarbonization, be it energy, agriculture, transport, just to mention a few. The second thing I think is around the point you just mentioned, Sarah, which is the complexity around it all, right? And driving the need to drive clarity forward with all those moving parts. And businesses are facing huge pressure to manage those complex priorities, and it's frankly unprecedented. So they're dealing with economic uncertainty, energy crisis, shifting industry priorities, and new sustainability regulations. So be it in the EU, CSRD, that'll impact many companies and around the world as well. And of course, there's more regulation expected around the world in time. The third thing, Tom mentioned data. The only add I would do is it's data, data, data. So we see that organizations are looking for a comprehensive and, more importantly, extensible solution to unify their environmental, financial, and operational data to record and report their progress to inform more effective and data-driven decisions. But if I may, Sarah, I want to kind of cover one example here, which is, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, which also happens to be a customer. Now, just for some context, it is obviously one of the biggest broadcasters in the world, with a portfolio that covers a range of digital services, radio networks, TV networks, etc. And in 2022, people spent 53 billion hours consuming BBC content just in the UK. And of course, broadcasting and production at this scale requires a sizable carbon footprint. So the BBC calculated that their greenhouse emissions in 2019-2020 came to 1.3 million tons of CO2 globally. So that's the equivalent of about 283,000, but who's counting, round-trip flights between London and New York, right? So the net zero targets are focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and they've recently implemented the Microsoft Sustainability Manager to consolidate all that data to be able to get ahead of these regulations and be able to manage, have one reliable source to monitor, manage the environmental impact. And, I think one of the favorite quotes I got from one of the folks at the BBC was, the platform itself is to help us avoid a cottage industry of spreadsheets. And that seems to be a general theme as well. And then, of course, the BBC is using all of this to monitor the energy consumption of travel, waste generation, all that stuff. So, again, in addition to leveraging this as a technology solution, the BBC intends to use this as a platform, their platform to promote programming and educate around the sustainability journey. So, again, that's one example, Sarah, of how we're seeing companies, first of all, manage through this and, of course, get ready for it and stay up to date as well. The second one, if I may, is very quickly is Microsoft. I've talked about our sustainability journey that we started in 2009. And we are bringing all of these learnings to our customers. But of course, we are using it ourselves as customer zero. That is actually helping us move that journey forward. And we're using our own product to drive our sustainability goals forward as well. So lots going on in this space, and very much top of mind for all of the customers we talk to.
And Tom, on this subject of how complex and subject to scrutiny decision-making on climate has become, do you have advice for boards or tomorrow's boards as they're seeking to navigate this web of climate-based decision-making?
Yes, I do. Look, at the end of the day, we live in an era of greenwash. And whilst I'm going to promote net zero till my dying death, you've got to recognize that net zero is intrinsically flawed because it's poorly defined. There are many organizations that make a net zero claim based on unrealistic assumptions. Of course, tech data allows you to tell a story, evidence your story in a way that is resilient. But without that, many of the net zero claims are simply not plausible because the assumptions aren't plausible. The second issue is that there are people who, at a sector level, identify a solution that cannot be replicated across the sector, let alone the economy, without breaking some planetary boundaries. If you simply look at the number of organizations that say, give me a forest the size of the Amazon, and we can offset everything that we do that's bad. There isn't enough forest. There isn't enough land to meet the needs of certain sectors, and yet they are all claiming to be moving towards net zero. That doesn't work either if you hit planetary boundaries. And the third, and the most egregious of the sins, are organizations who simply take a view saying, look, net zero is a long-term pathway. It's in my interest to maintain fully depreciated assets on which I'm earning an economic rent and basically maintain the status quo for a decade. I'll be gone and I'll leave the rest of the problem to somebody else. So 3 good reasons why net zero isn't right. Technology is a fantastic way of dealing with these challenges in the greenwash, because it does allow you to evidence in a convincing way, not only to your employees and stakeholders, but to the regulators, what you're doing is true, it's not greenwash, it's part of a long-term plan. So, yeah, I think as an anti-greenwash, tech and data has an awful lot to say for it.
So in the short time that we have left, I have a bit of a lightning round for each of you. Could each of you name one technology that you think people should focus on in their sustainability journey, whether that's now or coming up in the near future? I will start with Andrea.
Thank you. I think that a better use of data, we are talking about data, and often we are talking about a huge quantity of data. So if there is a technology which can really help in reducing the carbon footprint of the usage of this data, is linked to the data processing. So the way in which we can minimize and reduce the energy consumption of all these data processing, because the number of data is huge, and we experience that in the space sector as well. So to me, this is very much linked to data processing.
Ashley, what about you? What's your one technology?
Well, as someone that works in the transportation space, I would say it's any piece of technology that allows us to do more with less, and that typically involves things like pooling rides and improving, technologies like engine bypass ratios, etc. So.
Yeah, I think as much as I love technology, I think, for us, we only succeed when our customers succeed. But from a technology front, I mean, we're super focused on equipping, our customers leverage AI to its full potential. And in this context, to accelerate each of their sustainability goals. There's some very exciting use cases that we're working on, that we're rapidly adding and iterating on right now. And it's really, really expanding the realm of what's possible. So a lot of exciting energy there. And I think my tech pick would be AI.
Nick, how about you?
Yes, so I think some correct answers before. I think maybe I'd suggest the word ecosystem, actually, where so I'm maybe not answering the right question. But what I mean is that if we come together with other organizations, with government, with startups, with academia, and so on, we can have far greater effect, not only within our organizations, but far beyond than we can do on our own. And I think if we're taking those ecosystem-based approaches by applying a lot of the technologies based before, probably AI is certainly the one that's getting an awful lot of traction in healthcare, then we can have a huge effect. And it's only really those ones where I think we can get the scale that we can start to move the needle from a climate change standpoint. So.
And Tom, you have the last word. What is your tech solution?
Okay. Well, look, at the Carbon Trust, we're passionate and have been for 15 years about offshore wind. And we've worked with the industry, helping it bring down the cost from the point where it was seen as being a bit of a joke to now being the most scalable, lowest cost renewable power available in many, many applications. Deep offshore wind can be very close to needs and demand for power. In different parts of the world. It's a fantastic technology. It's just at the beginning of its, as it were, global rollout, having started in Northwest Europe. It's now very much being talked about and developed and implemented around the world, and we're delighted to be working with offshore wind. And of course, the great thing about offshore wind is you end up with truly green, zero carbon, pretty much zero carbon power, which allows you to then use all the data solutions you can to optimize everything else you do in life. So, zero carbon power come from offshore wind will allow us to do an awful lot of great stuff with data.
So I think the moral here is that all of you should get together and collaborate on all of these solutions. This has been a really enlightening and fascinating discussion. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the scale of the challenge when it comes to climate change. And it's really great to hear about these really ambitious goals related to technology and how we can meet this challenge with these new kinds of solutions. So thank you all so much for being with us and speaking with us. And thank you to our audience for tuning in.